Hi, everyone. Welcome to our highly anticipated webinar on fostering workplace inclusivity, a path to success. I'm your host, Paul Enriquez, Senior Marketing Specialist of Generali Philippines, and I'm thrilled to guide you through this enlightening session that will shed light on the crucial topic of workplace inclusivity. Today, we'll reflect on why workplace inclusivity is vital for both employees and organizations alike, and delve into a discussion revolving around these four topics. First one is, how do you evaluate your company's readiness for disability inclusion? The second one is, what changes need to be made in the company to be disability inclusive? Third one is, how we accommodate these changes in the company for disability inclusion? And the fourth one is, how do we create a welcoming environment for PWDs? To help us learn more about these key points, let me introduce our distinguished speaker for today. She is an instructor, researcher, and disability rights advocate focusing on technology and digital accessibility. She teaches fundamentals of ICT and web technologies to first-year and second-year college students at the Pamantasan Lungsod ng Muntinlupa. She's also a postgraduate student taking up a master's in information technology and working towards research on web accessibility. She volunteers as a researcher at User Experience Philippines to learn more about the field closest to accessibility and universal design. As a disabled person herself, she advocates for digital accessibility by speaking to different organizations and communities about the impact of accessibility on the digital space. Together with her fellow blind friends, she manages a YouTube channel called Visually Impaired Fashion and Lifestyle, where they produce fun and engaging videos to spread awareness within and beyond the disabled community. Now she's with us today to share valuable insights with us. Let us give a warm virtual welcome to Miss Beverly Bravo.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Paul, for that wonderful introduction. So I'm just happy and excited to be here and to be able to share my experiences and knowledge in this topic. So today we will talk about creating an inclusive workplace for persons with disabilities. So this is about us, organizations and companies evaluating our readiness and implementing changes. So just to give you an overview of what we will cover today. So Paul already mentioned the questions that we will answer, but just to add to that, we will also have a quick intro to disability and inclusion. We'll have evaluating company readiness. We'll also have identifying necessary changes, the implementations or the actionables that we can do in order to implement disability inclusion in the company or in the workplace, how we can create a welcoming environment for all. And also, one thing that I want to emphasize today is what we call reasonable accommodation. And finally, we can also talk about the mechanisms, monitoring, and continuous improvement. So yeah, let's start now. So now, we'll start with the discussion. So first off, before we foster disability inclusion in the workplace, we have to first understand what disability is. So we have different disabilities. As written in the slide, disability is a spectrum. So I've listed there some types of disabilities. These are the most common ones, but we have other types of disabilities that I haven't listed here. So, for example, we have physical, we have sensory, we have cognitive, and we have neurological. So, physical disabilities physical disabilities refers to all types related to mobility. So, people who are using wheelchair, using crutches, people who have dexterity difficulties. So, that's under the physical disability. So when we say sensory disability, this refers to any disability that affects the vision and hearing capability of a person. So this includes deaf people, visually impaired people like me. Cognitive, on the other hand, refers to all intellectual disabilities as well as learning disabilities, dyslexic people, dysgraphia, and other types of that. And neurological disabilities refers to anything that affects the nervous system. So, yeah, disability is a spectrum. So, as an example, I am a visually impaired. So, since birth, due to corneal glaucoma, and most people think that when you say visually impaired, it's automatic that all of us are totally blind or we can't see anything. Contrary to that, majority of visually impaired actually has their remaining sight. So, for example, I am considered low vision. So, when you say low vision, it means that I still have remaining sight enough to distinguish colors, distinguish shapes, write on a piece of paper, but I can only read large print, and also enough for me to use the mouse and move around places which are already familiar with me and I've already oriented with. So, uh, it's important for companies to have like a profile of all the disabilities that they have in the company, or all the disabilities that their employees might have in the company. So later on we'll talk about how we can foster like a safe environment for that. And in that context, inclusion is about creating that environment where all people, regardless of abilities or disabilities, can fully participate and have the same opportunities that other employees are getting. So that's disability inclusion in a nutshell. And also important concept that we have to consider and know about is about disability perspectives. So every time I conduct disability sensitivity workshops, this is like the intro topic or the must-have topic that we always discuss. So disability perspectives is about how we, as an organization or as individuals, how do we see disability? So I have listed there three common disability perspectives or disability models that we are most familiar with, at least here in the Philippines. So, first off, we have what we call the medical model. So, when we say medical, we see disability as something that um, or something to be cured. So, for example, if we're doctors, the first instinct is, of course, for us to treat the disability. And for some people, they view disability as something that should be corrected. So, well, I'm not saying that the medical model is the wrong way to think about disability, but it's just another way of thinking about that. And also we have charity model. So we see people with disabilities as that we uh, someone that should be pitied, or someone that or we consider them as subject to charity dole-outs and all of those things. And the third one, which most advocates here in the Philippines are subscribe to, is what we call social model. So in this model, we see disability as a result of the environment. So I didn't include it here, but we can also actually categorize disability as in different ways. For example, we have temporary disability, have situational disability, and we also have permanent disability. So for example, my disability as a visually impaired um is considered permanent. So I was born as a visually impaired and it cannot be reversed. So on the other hand, situational disability is brought about by the environment. So for example, if you're on a grocery store, you're holding a lot of stuff and suddenly someone calls you, in that moment you would have like difficulties in answering the phone, not because your hands are not functional, but because the situation doesn't allow you to. Another example is when you're at at a loud place, for example, inside a bar or a restaurant wherein people are talking with each other, and suddenly also someone calls you and you can't hear them over the phone. So at that moment, you can call yourself temporarily disabled, not because your ears are not functional, but because of the situation that doesn't allow you to hear clearly. And temporary disability refers to, for example, sudden injuries brought about by different types of accidents. So, for example, you suddenly find yourself injured, or for example, your hands are temporarily injured. So, in that moment, you can consider yourself temporarily disabled. Yeah, not because um, it's not because your hands are not fully functional, but because of the accident. So yeah, we it's important for us to know this, to be able to integrate these kinds of situations and perspectives into our policies, because policies are like the compass of how we can implement disability inclusion. So moving on to that, we have readiness for disability inclusion. So these are the things that we can do initially, and we can do continuously in order to foster disability inclusion. So that includes assessing our current policies, practices, and attitudes. So in terms of disability inclusions, there are a lot of barriers that persons with disabilities face. So we have communication barriers, attitudinal barriers, and even environment or physical barriers. And the first thing, or the most important thing to do, is to first assess where we are in terms of policies, because policies are going to guide us on how we can implement programs and practices onto our workplace. Also, consider inclusivity at all levels. So, this means that we should implement or integrate inclusivity in terms of, for example, during recruitment process or admission process, during the process of integrating the person with disability within the workplace, as well as how he or she interacts with the employee, as well as, for example, integrating him or including him or her in the team building activities. How do we do that? So it's about considering all aspects of interaction, and of course seeking employee feedback. So before we start, we have to know where we are in terms of disability inclusion, and or even do we even have a person with disability in the workplace, because there are a lot of situations wherein companies don't even know that they already have a person with disabilities as part of their workforce. And one of the reasons why that happens, or that usually happens, is because the person with disability doesn't feel safe um, to disclose his or her disabilities, because of the misconceptions about different disabilities, and also that also contributes to how the possibility of, for example, losing his or her job by just disclosing his disability. So that's a bit tricky for a person with disability in the workplace. So these are some key indicators of our readiness. Usually, the first question that companies have before they start integrating or considering about disability inclusion is that, when is when would be the best time to start? And the answer for that is now. So as soon as possible, we have to start. And companies and other organizations could never be like fully ready to embark on a journey, because disability inclusion is a journey. So nobody, no company is going to be ready to start. But of course, we have at some point to initiate that journey. So here we have some key indicators. First off, we have leadership commitment. So we have to have like the buy-in of the higher ups, of course, in order to start doing these programs and policy assessment. And it would be a big help if our leaders are also committed in fostering disability inclusion in the workplace, because everything will follow as soon as our leaders are willing to start. So comprehensive policies and procedures. So later on, I have an example here of a framework written by our good friends from the industry as well. So on how we can assess our policies and procedures. Also, we have accessible physical infrastructure. Um, in this key indicator, accessible physical infrastructure, this I think this would be the most um familiar with people, the physical infrastructure, because when we say person with disability, oftentimes the first disability that they would think of is person who has mobility impairment. And in terms of physical environment, so they need like an elevator to move from one floor to another, or a ramp. And um it's also a misconception that ramp or other types of adjustment in terms of our physical infrastructure is just for persons with disabilities. On contrary, for example, the ramp can be first off can be used by people who are using wheelchair. They can also be used by our employees who are pregnant. They can also be used by our, for example, if we have events within the company, for example, in the fifth floor. So the ramp could be used by our caterers, for example, to bring the food, so using a trolley. There are still a lot of benefits of having these built-in environments, or these changes into our physical infrastructure. So next is inclusive communication and accessible technologies. So um, I mentioned earlier that one of the barriers that persons with disabilities encounter is communication barrier, and we have other types of barriers like attitudinal barriers, physical barriers. But in terms of communication barriers, oftentimes people are scared for some reason in talking to persons with disabilities. So sometimes we just need just like, that one conversation, that one dialogue with a person with disability in order to just get to know us, get to know the realities that we live in. So in order for companies or for people to interact with us. And that would also bring us to having trainings and awareness programs. So most companies that I've worked with before, we always start with sensitivity and awareness workshop. And they always find it so enlightening because persons with disabilities are just, persons. So we are person first before our disabilities. So it's important for all employees in the company to be aware of that. Okay, so this is the framework that I've mentioned earlier. So this was written by a good friend, Chrissy Bista and Ellie Yanga. So they're both HR practitioners. So actually, this framework doesn't just apply to disability inclusion, but can also be used in JEDC. So, when we say JEDC, these are different types of marginalized sectors. Like, of course, about the gender, about indigenous people, and also that includes persons with disabilities. So in terms of how we create our policies, so the first step is of course to assess um some questions or indicators that we can check is first the representation. So in terms of policies, are there explicit sightings or explicit mentions of persons with disabilities um, in terms of applicability in the policy and programs? Are there um, are 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 there policies or programs that are specific to the needs or well suited to the needs of persons with disabilities? So you can rate yourselves. This has like a scale of 1 to 5. You can rate your policies and programs based on these indicators. We have also sensitivity. In terms of sensitivity, this refers to the language we use. For example, in the Philippines, we subscribe to person first language, meaning we call um you can call us persons with disabilities, persons with visual impairment, persons with mobility impairment, persons who are hearing impaired. So we also have other types of language, the way we use language in terms of labeling disabilities. One of which is identity first language. So, for example, instead of using persons with visual impairment, you can just call us visually impaired or blind. So, the best thing here is first to ask the person. It's important for companies to consult the right people. So, next up, of course, we have harmony. So in terms of creating or writing our policies and programs, we have to also base it on the existing laws. So for example, in the United Nations Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or UNCRPD, um, we can base our policies there. So the important thing here is we don't contradict the existing laws laws that we have. And then we have feedback. So do our policies have like a feedback mechanism where people can, for example, correct or suggest points of improvement to our policies? So this is just one example of a framework that we can use in order to assess our policies and programs in the company. So far, this study isn't published yet, but if you want to know more about this, you can reach out to Chrissy and Ellie via LinkedIn. So, yeah. Okay. Now, let's have identifying necessary changes. So, the next question here is, where should we start? So, these are the things that we can start with. First is develop or enhance policies and programs or procedures. So as I mentioned earlier, you can use the framework that I've mentioned in the previous slides, but there are a lot of um, frameworks that you can use depending on your company and what's suited. But in terms of that framework that I mentioned earlier, it's like a general type of framework, and I'm sure every company could use that. So it's very general yet specific to marginalized sectors. Next is we can start with modifying our spaces, our physical spaces for accessibility and comfort. So I know that this would be a bit challenging, especially if we already have the infrastructure. So we can. I'm not an expert on physical like built-in environments, but in the Philippines we have architects that specializes in accessible built-in environments. You can reach out to them. As far as I know, we only have two in the Philippines, one of which is architect Arman. So um there are like specifications for example, how stiff the ramp should be. And we can always start by consulting the experts on this. So next up, we could also, of course, enhance our communication methods to be more inclusive. So I can only speak for persons with visual impairment. So in terms of communication, we don't need much actually. For example, we just need accessible materials. For example, if you have like a memo, it should be we should have like a soft copy of that memo because we can't read like images without an alternative text. So alt text is it's a piece of text that describes an image. So also you can just talk to us. Some protocols that I could think of right now. For example, when you're talking to a visually impaired, you should always introduce yourselves. Because we don't have like a database of all your voices. Because people always think that we can remember all of their names just based on their voice. Though I myself I only recognize people by their voices, but I prefer it if people would introduce themselves every time they talk to me because yeah, I don't have like a list on my head of those I can't easily associate their voices with their names. So that is also different for other disabilities, for persons for deaf people. So not all deaf people can read lips or do lip reading, and some can even understand sign language. Some deaf people communicate with signboards or communicate using their phones. So again, we'll go back to, we should ask the persons with disabilities involved, and also provide adequate training and resources to employees. Of course, the people who are going to interact with a person with disability should be well aware of how they can communicate and properly interact with the person with disabilities themselves. So sensitivity workshops or sensitivity and awareness workshops is very would be very helpful in fostering that harmonious relationship among employees. So okay. So in terms of implementation, first off, we have to develop an inclusive strategy plan or action plan. So, oftentimes the challenge here is, where do we start and what are the steps that we should take? So, first off, we have to plan. And in terms of planning, we have to always include the persons who are involved. Of course, in this case, we have the persons with disabilities, because no one would be the best or the better person to um, um, tell you their needs, but the persons themselves. So you have to always consult them and let them participate in the discussion. So again, also engage employee at all levels. So for example, in terms of recruitment and operations, and most importantly, are the people under human resources. So we have to involve everyone in the discussion of disability inclusion. And of course, training is very important. We could reach out to people to conduct trainings, sensitivity workshops um to our employees. Of course, foster partnerships. So as I mentioned, disability inclusion would be a journey, and it would be a long journey, but it's a journey worth taking, of course. So we have to foster partnerships. There are a lot of organizations that we could reach out to. For example, companies or organizations, mostly nonprofit organizations that conduct sensitivity workshops, or that is knowledgeable in terms of how to employ. or integrate persons with disabilities within your company. So all you have to do is just reach out. There are a lot of them out there. So next up we have creating a welcoming environment. So I mentioned this earlier. Of course, we have to foster a culture of empathy, understanding, and openness. So we have to foster this safe space for all our employees, not just persons with disabilities, but all our employees to speak up and be more assertive in communicating their needs. Also, celebrate diversity and inclusion um, through various events and activities. So again, this will bring us back to always ask and consult. What would be the activities that would be inclusive for all people? So yeah, it's about celebrating diversity, truly embracing our differences. So also encouraging teamwork and collaboration. um, of course, persons with disabilities, we can choose who we will be working with, and um that's super okay because we love collaborating. We love talking to people. Persons with disabilities are again just your typical persons. It just so happened that we have our disabilities, which would be considered as just one of our attributes. And of course, promote mentoring and networking opportunities. So, in terms of this would also bring us to the communication barrier. So companies should always promote networking opportunities for persons with disabilities, include them in different teams. Number one, for them to further grow as an employee, and also to expose them to different people, because experience would still be the best teacher in interacting with a person with disability. So yeah. Okay, so I've mentioned that I really want to talk about this, the what we call reasonable accommodation. So, Project Inclusion Network has this um, framework. So, I got this from them. So we have here triple A. So when we say, let's first define what reasonable accommodation is. So when we say reasonable accommodation, it's about providing the specific needs or needs suited to a person with disabilities, which can help them perform better in the workplace. So reasonable accommodation is different from special treatment. So we're not this reasonable accommodation isn't a form of charity, or we're not being generous to the person with disability. We're just providing their needs in order for them to fully function in the workplace. So we have here what we call triple A. So we have first to acknowledge, we have ask, and we have accommodate. So in terms of acknowledgement, we have to acknowledge the disability of the person. It's about, of course, accepting the disability, acknowledging their needs, their challenges, their capabilities. And after that, when we have those information, we have to ask them, so what do you need? How can we assist you? Because oftentimes they always have the answer to that. And after that, if we can always meet halfway. So if you ask the person, what do you need? I need accessible materials for this project. If the accommodation that a person with disabilities need isn't available or isn't possible to accomplish, you can converse, you can compromise. And then lastly is to accommodate. So after having that information about their disability and about their needs, how can we, or how can you as a company accommodate? And we also have the three C's. So we're not doctors. It's impossible for us to fully grasp the complexities of um everyone's disabilities. So we have here for three C's, we have characteristics, we have challenges, and we have capabilities. So for characteristics, we don't need to again view disability in a scientific way. We just have to know the characteristics of the disability. For example, for a person with visual impairment, what are the characteristics? For example, I can still distinguish colors. I can still read printed materials in large print. So and what are the capacity of every disability in terms of challenges? What are the challenges brought about by their disability? Difficulty in mobility, difficulty in seeing, in hearing, all of those stuff. And of course the capabilities. So we have to focus on the strengths of that person with disabilities. Are they are they good in numbers like other people do? Are they good in marketing and other capabilities that can contribute to the company? So yeah. Okay. Okay. So again, these are just some of the things that we can do in order to give reasonable accommodation to our persons with disabilities. So this would be the last slide. So I just want to say that disability inclusion benefits all. So if we accommodate our persons with disabilities, if we start with our policies and programs, everyone could benefit from this. If persons with disabilities could be fully productive within the workplace, that helps the company overall. And also, it should be holistic. Disability inclusion should be integrated in all levels and or in all aspects of your company. And lastly, it's a journey. So as I mentioned, it's a journey. It would be a long journey, but it would be worth it. And you're not alone in this journey of integrating disability inclusion. So all you have to do is reach out, have that conversation with the people themselves who would benefit for with who would benefit from integrating inclusion. So yeah, this ends. Wait, before I end with my discussion today, I have here a meme that I got from Sarah Zimmerman. So in the photo we have a square system. So um we have this the system which accepts square shapes. And then we have here the different colors of circles. So of course the system the this system is supposed to only accept square shapes. So the circles are asking the square system to, why don't you change for us so that everyone could fit. So it's about creating the right system so that everyone could be included and can fully participate in not just in the workplace but in the society overall. So yeah, that ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Beverly, for enlightening us with your wisdom on fostering workplace inclusivity. Your insights will undoubtedly inspire positive change in organizations striving for inclusiveness. Thank you also to the Philippine Business Development Network for your participation in this endeavor. Before we conclude, I encourage you all to watch for more of our upcoming webinars by visiting our website at www.generali.com.ph. And remember that the journey toward inclusivity is a shared responsibility. Have a fantastic day ahead to all of you. Thank you.